Humans are so sinful, apart from the grace of God in Christ, that we cannot do any good works at all. I will come back shortly to argue for that biblically, because it sounds outrageous as it stands. It's a pressing question. Do you believe that? No, you don't. And you do. Don't you believe that an unbeliever can build a hospital? An unbeliever can keep the speed limit. An unbeliever can negotiate national peace. An unbeliever can fight Ebola, even risk his life. An unbeliever can feed the poor. An unbeliever can pay a fair wage. Is that good? It's good. So what in the world do I mean, or Westerholm? You are not capable of any good. We know that not just you use the vocabulary of good that way, and the world does, the Bible does. Romans 13:3. Rulers are not a terror to good conduct. So there's something out there called good conduct, but too bad. Would you have no fear of them? Do what is good, and you will receive their approval. You and the Bible call keeping the speed limit good. And building hospitals and working to find healing for cancer and leukemia and Ebola. That's good. So to quote Westerholm again, what did he mean when he said, quote, human beings are incapable of doing good works? And why do I agree with him? The most penetrating and extensive treatment of sin in the Bible, I think, is the first 3 chapters of the book of Romans. And even where the word sin is not occurring there, we know that's what it's talking about, because when he gets to the end of his analysis of the human condition in chapter 3, verse 9, he says this: what then? Are we Jews any better off? No, not at all, for we have already charged that both Jews and Greeks are under sin. That's the charge of Romans 1-3. Or the next verse makes clear what he means. Verse 10 of Romans 3. None is righteous, no, not one. And verse 12, even more. No one does good, not even one. That's the conclusion of the analysis of Paul in Romans 1, 2, and 3. So if you have a Bible or a phone, open it to Romans 1, because the rest of this message is rooted here. What I want to know is, what is the essence of sin in Romans 1-3? What's at the bottom of all sinning? What makes all sinful actions sinful? What's wrong with me at my core that gives rise to so many different kinds of evil? And you might say, why do you even think that way? Why do you even pose such a question? Why don't you just assume what we do is sin? Why do you insist on even shaping the discussion that way? that there's doing and then there's roots. There's nature, there's depravity. What do you Reformed people talk about depravity? Why don't we just talk about the things you do to hurt people or dishonor God are wrong? That's sin. Why do you go down here? And the answer is because Paul does. And he doesn't just do it incidentally, he does it rigorously and intensely and repeatedly in chapter 1. Way more than I thought he did as I was getting ready for this. And because he says things like this elsewhere. Romans 7, verse 8. Sin, seizing opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. Well, covetousness is a sin. It's the 10th commandment. Thou shalt not covet. If your heart is a coveting heart, you are sinning. But what he says is, sin, taking opportunity in the commandment, produced covetousness. So sin produces sin. Right? And I want to know, sin number one, who are you? What are you? I know this one well. I know the fruit. I know the tree. I want to know you, Mr. Sin producing sin. That's what I'm after, because Paul really, really cares about that. And evidently then he thinks it's very, very important that we go beneath our sinning to our sin. What's the bottom of all my evils and yours? So let's start at verse 18, chapter 1, and notice a sequence of relationships that are remarkable, repetitive and remarkable. Verse 18, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. So here, mankind in general is described as ungodly and unrighteous. 1 John 5:17 says, all unrighteousness is sin. Adikia is hamartia. So we know what we're dealing with here. To all unrighteousness and ungodliness of men who, what's the first thing they do? They suppress the truth. Our ungodliness and unrighteousness inclines us to suppress truth. We repel the light. We run into darkness. Jesus said in John 3 that we are guilty sinners, not because we're victims of darkness, but lovers of darkness. I'll read it to you. John 3:19. Light has come into the world, and people loved darkness rather than light. So right off the bat, I'm getting the feeling, okay, deep down in me, issues are love issues. I love the dark. I can suppress the truth so much more easily in the dark. And that's what sin does. It suppresses truth. Now, what truth does it specialize in suppressing? Verse 19. Because what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Knowledge of God is the truth that sin wants to suppress. So he says, therefore we have no excuse. Verse 20, middle of the verse. So they are without excuse. Verse 21, why? Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him or give him thanks. So the root of why we suppress the truth is that we don't want to glorify or thank God. And the truth is always testifying to his glory and his beneficence, and so it has to be squished down, put out of our mind, lest we feel guilty about not glorifying and thanking him. We don't want to do it because we're sinners, and sin doesn't thank God. Sin doesn't glorify God. Sin loves darkness, which conceals the glory of God and the beneficence of God. Sin is not just a hater of the light and of the knowledge of God, desiring to suppress it. Sin is a lover. When the hated truth is suppressed, the loved lie is embraced. Verse 22. Claiming to be wise, they, that is, those who suppress the truth, have darkened hearts. Claiming to be wise, they have become fools, and they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images. They don't just bury truth, they embrace alternative lovers. There's no vacuum in the human heart, ever. When the real God is rejected, images are embraced. They exchanged the glory of God for images. Sin hates the true God, and sin loves God substituting images. And we, more than any culture in the history of the world, live in an age of images. We spend almost all our leisure time looking at images. It's quite irrelevant, I think, that for Paul those images were stone or wood along the side of an Athenian road, and ours are on our phone or television or computer. It's irrelevant. Totally irrelevant. The issue is substitution. They exchanged the infinitely valuable glory of God for the glory of that show of images coming off the screen. Now watch how Paul describes the relationship between this exchange of glory, this replacement of the true God, the suppression of the truth, with the outpouring of sinning. So you've got suppression of the truth about the glory of God and the beneficence of God, so that we don't have to glorify him, we don't have to thank him. And then the exchange, like, here's the glory of God, no thank you, image please, I love this, oh, I love this image, glory of God, don't want it. Now what's the relationship between that and sinning? Verse 24. Therefore, wherefore? Namely, because of verse 23, because of the exchange. Therefore, God gave them up in the lusts or the desires of their hearts to impurity and to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves. So, because of the exchange of the glory of God for images, God goes hands off. And godlessness and unrighteousness of the human heart goes unrestrained into sinning. And lest we miss the connection between 23 and 24, here it comes again now in verses 24 and 25. Verse 24, the desires of their hearts run to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies. Verse 25, because, so why does all that dishonoring of their bodies and why does all that impurity happen in the world? Because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator. So the impurities of sinning have a root. Sinning is verse 24, the root is verse 25. They have exchanged the truth about God for a lie. Sin hates the truth about God. Sin suppresses it, sin exchanges it, and instead it loves, worships, and serves substitutes, images, creatures. Might be just the universe, if you're a good astronomer or a physicist. You just worship the magnificence of the thing made, galaxies, but with all your might, suppress the truth that it was made by one who holds you accountable to worship Him. Now we've seen it twice. Unless we missed those two, here it comes again. We've seen it in the connection between 23 and 24. We've seen it in the connection between 24 and 25. Here it is again between 25 and 26. How many times is he going to do it? I'll tell you, 4. This is number 3. Verse 26. For this reason, what reason? Well, for the reason of verse 25. Because we exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. So the flood of dishonorable passions in the world have a root. Namely, the suppression of truth, the exchange of the glory of God for substitutes. And please forgive Paul, but here he goes one more time to show us the connection between the root of our depravity and the flood of sins that flow from us all. So he does it between 23 and 24, connection between 24 and 25, the connection between 25 and 26, and now look at the logic of verse 28. Since, or just as, they did not see fit. I'm going to come back to this translation. I don't like it. Since they did not see fit to have God in their, did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. Now I think, I'm looking at the ESV here, they did not see fit to acknowledge God, I think is a bland translation of words that would go more exactly with force like this. They did not approve, dokimazo, of having God in their knowledge. That's really powerful. Not see fit to acknowledge God, just they considered the possibility that God should be an integral, dominant part of their knowledge, and they disapproved of it. That's sin. That's the essence of sin. I don't want you in my knowledge. No, I will not have you in my knowledge. And therefore, God gives them over to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. So notice two phrases, two crucial terms in that last phrase. debased mind and do what ought not to be done. God hands them over, it says, to a debased mind. Debased. What's the historic theological word for that? Depraved. It's a good translation. It's a good word. If you ever wondered, where does that word depraved for human beings come from? Verse 28. God gives us over to a depraved mind, a base mind, a corrupted mind, a ruined mind. He gives us over to it because we disapprove of having God in our knowledge. And the other phrase that you need to feel the force of is, do what ought not to be done. God gave them up to a depraved mind to do what ought not to be done. So this depravity, this debased mind, does things. It does things. Like all day long, it does things. So there is action, doing, and there is root. There's the bottom. There's sin and there's sinning. And I'm arguing that we, at the bottom of our sinfulness, don't like the true and living God. We don't like Him. We suppress the truth that leads to Him. We exchange His glory for substitutes that we prefer. We disapprove of having Him in our knowledge. We have a deep, unshakable, compelling preference for other things to God. Everything to God. And that is the bottom. So when we get to the juncture of Paul's shift from indictment and analysis to how did God save sinners, it's not surprising at verse 23 of chapter 3, a verse almost everybody in this room knows by heart, Romans 3:23, not surprising the way he said it. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory